She stood frozen as everyone snapped to attention. "Why aren't you saluting Captain Reeves? That's insubordination." The major barked across the parade ground. The young lieutenant didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared straight ahead and said calmly, "Some honors must be earned, not automatically given." The silence that followed was like a thunderclap. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." At Fort Blackstone Military Base, Lieutenant Maya Winters, 28 years old, stood out not for her military achievements, but for her principles. Dark hair always precisely tied back in a regulation bun, 5 feet 8 inches tall with perfect posture, olive skin with a distinctive birthmark on her left temple shaped like a crescent moon. She wore her uniform with meticulous care, every button polished, every crease sharp. The only personal touch was a thin silver bracelet barely visible under her sleeve cuff, bearing an inscription too small to read without looking closely. Maya moved through the base with quiet efficiency, her face rarely showing emotion, but her eyes missing nothing. Other officers described her as rigidly by the book, yet unpredictable. She completed every task with precision, but sometimes questioned orders in ways that made superior officers uncomfortable. Not because she was disrespectful, but because her questions exposed flaws in their thinking they weren't prepared to confront. The incident happened during the annual Distinguished Service Ceremony, a prestigious event where decorated officers received recognition for exceptional leadership. The base had been preparing for weeks. Flags lined the parade ground, brass bands rehearsed ceremonial music, dignitaries arrived from Washington. Everyone understood the protocol: stand at attention, salute as the honored officers passed, maintain absolute discipline regardless of personal feelings. Captain James Reeves was the celebration's centerpiece, recently promoted after leading a successful classified operation. His uniform gleamed with medals, his smile confident as he strode across the parade ground, acknowledging the salutes directed his way. Military photographers captured every moment for recruitment materials. Visiting generals nodded approvingly at this perfect image of military excellence. When Captain Reeves approached Lieutenant Winters' section, everyone snapped to attention with practiced precision. Arms raised in perfect salutes, faces composed into expressions of appropriate respect. Everyone except Maya. She stood rigidly at attention, hands fixed at her sides, eyes forward. The breach of protocol was immediately obvious. Ceremony coordinators exchanged panicked glances. The base commander's face flushed dark red. Major William Donovan broke formation, approaching Maya with controlled fury. "Lieutenant Winters, explain yourself immediately." His voice carried across the now silent parade ground. Hundreds of soldiers watched, barely breathing. This type of disruption was unprecedented. Maya's voice remained calm, controlled. "Some honors must be earned, not automatically given." She didn't elaborate, didn't raise her voice, simply stated her position as though it were a meteorological observation rather than a career-ending act of defiance. Captain Reeves stopped walking, his previously confident expression faltering. For just a moment, something like fear flickered across his features before being replaced by practiced indignation. "Major, I suggest we continue the ceremony. This incident can be addressed afterward." The slight hesitation in his voice was noticed by those standing closest. The ceremony proceeded with a palpable tension. Soldiers maintained their formations, but whispers began circulating immediately. Who was Lieutenant Winters? What could possibly justify such a breach of military protocol? How severe would her punishment be? Most assumed she would be court-martialed, her military career finished before it truly began. After the ceremony, Maya was immediately escorted to Colonel Patricia Harrington's office. The base commander was known for strict adherence to protocol and uncompromising discipline. No one expected leniency. Military police positioned themselves outside the office door, suggesting the seriousness with which the incident was being treated. Inside, Colonel Harrington studied Maya with narrowed eyes. "Lieutenant, I've reviewed your service record while waiting for you. West Point graduate, top of your class in tactical analysis, multiple commendations for excellence in training exercises. Not a single disciplinary mark until today." She leaned forward. "So explain to me why an officer with your promising future would throw it all away with such a public display of insubordination." Maya stood at attention, her posture perfect. "Request permission to speak freely, Colonel." "Granted, though I suggest you choose your words carefully. 3 months ago, I was assigned to analyze field reports from Operation Sable Shield, which Captain Reeves commanded. The official narrative indicates flawless execution, resulting in mission success with minimal casualties." Maya paused, her expression unchanged but her eyes intensely focused. However, the field reports contained significant discrepancies that suggested serious tactical errors and unauthorized decisions that directly endangered both civilians and soldiers under his command. Colonel Harrington's expression revealed nothing. "Continue." "I submitted a detailed analysis through appropriate channels, highlighting these discrepancies and requesting further investigation. My report was returned marked Review Complete. No action required. I resubmitted with additional evidence from medical evacuation records, showing injury patterns inconsistent with the official narrative. That report disappeared entirely from the system." Maya maintained perfect military bearing as she spoke, but the intensity in her voice grew. "I then discovered that 3 soldiers from that operation who had been listed as receiving minor injuries were actually transferred to long-term psychiatric care facilities with sealed records. When I attempted to interview them, I was denied access and received a formal reprimand for exceeding my authority." The colonel's eyes narrowed. "Lieutenant, questioning a superior officer's tactical decisions after an operation has been officially reviewed is not your place. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. With respect, Colonel, ensuring accountability for unnecessary casualties is every officer's responsibility. The evidence suggests Captain Reeves deliberately ordered his team into an unauthorized area after being explicitly instructed to avoid civilian concentrations. The resulting engagement led to civilian casualties that were deliberately omitted from official reports." Maya reached into her uniform pocket and removed a small data drive. This contains testimony from Staff Sergeant Elena Cortez, who was part of Captain Reeves' communications team. She confirms that he received and acknowledged orders to avoid the village, then deliberately led his team there anyway, claiming communication failure afterward. She also confirms that his report deliberately undercounted civilian casualties. Colonel Harrington didn't reach for the drive. "Lieutenant, even if these allegations have merit, the ceremony was not the appropriate venue to raise them. There are proper channels." "Channels I exhausted, Colonel," Maya interrupted, a rare breach of military courtesy that showed her conviction. 3 separate reports, all suppressed. Meanwhile, Captain Reeves receives a promotion and public recognition for an operation that should be under investigation. I could not in good conscience salute an officer who betrayed both his mission parameters and the troops under his command. The colonel was silent for a long moment, studying Maya's face. "Do you understand that your actions today will likely end your military career? That regardless of your motivations, public insubordination cannot be tolerated?" Maya nodded once, her expression resolute. "Some principles matter more than career advancement, Colonel. If the cost of keeping my commission is participating in a cover-up of decisions that cost lives unnecessarily, then it's a commission I cannot in good conscience keep." Colonel Harrington leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "You're dismissed to quarters, Lieutenant." Consider yourself restricted to base pending formal disciplinary proceedings. Surrender your sidearm to the MP outside. As Maya left the office, the whispers had already spread throughout the base. Most assumed she had committed career suicide for some personal grievance against Captain Reeves. Some speculated about romantic entanglements or professional jealousy. Few considered that her actions might be based on genuine ethical concerns. In her quarters, Maya methodically packed her personal belongings, expecting to be discharged within days. She had no regrets about her decision, but felt a profound sadness about leaving the military career she had worked towards since childhood. 3 generations of her family had served with distinction. Now she would be the first Winters to leave the service in disgrace. A knock at her door surprised her. Opening it revealed Staff Sergeant Elena Cortez, the communications specialist. Maya had mentioned to the colonel. The woman looked nervous, glancing down the hallway before speaking in a low voice. "Is it true you refused to salute Captain Reeves because of what happened at Almahira village?" Maya studied her carefully before nodding once. "I need to show you something." Elena handed over a tablet computer with security encryption active. "This is the actual communication log from that day. Captain Reeves didn't just ignore orders to avoid the village. He deliberately targeted it because intelligence suggested a high-value target might be hiding there, even though confirmation was explicitly required before engagement." Maya reviewed the logs, her expression darkening. "This is worse than I realized. He was gambling with civilians' lives for a career advancement opportunity." Elena nodded grimly. "There's more. After the operation, when it became clear there was no high-value target, he ordered all of us to modify our reports. Those who objected were transferred out or pressured into silence. 2 team members who witnessed the worst of it had breakdowns afterward. They're the ones in psychiatric care now." "Why are you showing me this now?" Maya asked quietly. "Because what you did today. It's the first time anyone has publicly challenged the official narrative. Some of us have been carrying this for months, not knowing what to do." Elena's voice trembled slightly. "After seeing you risk everything by refusing that salute, several team members have decided to come forward with their accounts. This revelation changed everything." Maya had acted alone, expecting to sacrifice her career for a principle that might never be vindicated. Now, her solitary stand might actually lead to accountability and justice for those affected by Captain Reeves' actions. Word spread quickly through unofficial channels. By evening, 3 more members of the operation had come forward with evidence supporting Maya's concerns. The base buzzed with speculation. Captain Reeves was suddenly unavailable, reportedly called to Washington for consultation on short notice. Maya remained in her quarters as ordered, prepared for the worst. When her door opened again, she expected military police with discharge papers. Instead, Colonel Harrington entered alone, her expression grave. "Lieutenant, I've spent the last 5 hours reviewing evidence that has suddenly become available regarding Operation Sable Shield." The colonel's tone was carefully neutral. "It appears your concerns had more substantive basis than initial reviews indicated." She placed a folder on Maya's desk. "The Inspector General's office has opened a formal investigation into Captain Reeves' conduct and the subsequent handling of field reports. You will be called to testify, as will several others who have now come forward." Maya maintained her composure, though her heart raced. "And my disciplinary status, Colonel?" "Remains complicated, Lieutenant. Your chosen method of protest violated military protocol in a highly public manner. That cannot simply be overlooked." The colonel paused, studying Maya carefully. "However, in light of the serious nature of the issues you were attempting to address, and the apparent obstruction you encountered through proper channels, your case will be reviewed separately from the main investigation." The colonel moved toward the door, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Lieutenant, I believe you acted from genuine concern for military integrity, not personal animosity. That will be reflected in my statement to the review board. As word of the investigation spread, the base divided into factions. Many career officers considered Maya's public insubordination unforgivable regardless of her motivations. Military discipline required following chain of command, they argued. If every soldier decided which orders to follow based on personal judgment, the entire system would collapse. Others, particularly younger officers and enlisted personnel, viewed Maya's stand differently. They saw someone willing to risk everything to uphold the military's core values when institutional processes failed. In barracks and mess halls, conversations centered around moral courage versus military discipline, with passionate advocates. On both sides, Captain Reeves' supporters initiated a counter-narrative, suggesting Maya had personal motivations for targeting him. Rumors circulated that she had been passed over for a position she wanted, or that she had romantic interests he had rejected. These attempts to discredit her backfired when Elena Cortez and others forcefully refuted them, pointing out that Maya had never even met Captain Reeves before the ceremony. 3 days after the ceremony, the base newspaper published an editorial about moral courage in military contexts without directly mentioning Maya or Captain Reeves. The piece discussed historical examples of soldiers who had made difficult ethical choices when confronted with conflicts between orders and moral imperatives. The timing was not coincidental, and everyone understood the subtext. Maya remained isolated in her quarters, preparing her testimony for the investigation. She had expected to face this process alone, but found herself with unexpected allies. A military defense attorney, Major Sarah Chen, volunteered to represent her. "What? You took extraordinary courage, Lieutenant," Major Chen told her during their first meeting. "I want to ensure that courage is contextualized properly during the proceedings." A week after the ceremony, Maya was called to testify before the investigative panel. The hearing was closed to most personnel, but authorized observers reported that she presented her evidence methodically, without emotion or personal attacks against Captain Reeves. She focused exclusively on the documented discrepancies in the operation reports and the pattern of obstruction she encountered when attempting to address them through proper channels. "My decision not to render a salute was not made lightly," she told the panel. "It represented my inability to reconcile the public celebration of leadership that privately betrayed core military values of honesty, integrity, and duty of care toward both civilians and personnel under command." The investigation expanded as more witnesses came forward. What had begun as a disciplinary matter against Maya evolved into a comprehensive review of Operation Sable Shield and the subsequent handling of field reports. Captain Reeves was placed on administrative leave pending outcomes. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Maya received new orders. Instead of the expected discharge, she was reassigned to the Inspector General's office as a special analyst focusing on field report verification protocols. The position removed her from the direct command structure of Fort Blackstone while allowing her to contribute her analytical skills to addressing the very systemic issues she had exposed. Colonel Harrington requested a private meeting before Maya's departure. "The easy path would have been to discharge you, Lieutenant," she said frankly. "Many senior officers wanted exactly that outcome. Your actions challenged not just Captain Reeves but the entire system that protected him." "I understand that, Colonel," Maya replied. "What you may not fully appreciate is the impact your stand has had on younger officers and enlisted personnel. The conversations happening across this base about moral courage and ethical leadership are unprecedented in my experience." The colonel studied Maya thoughtfully. "Sometimes the military needs rule followers, but sometimes it needs people willing to risk everything for the right principles." As Maya prepared to leave Fort Blackstone, she found a small group of officers and enlisted personnel waiting to see her off. Some she recognized as having served under Captain Reeves, including Alana Cortez. Others were personnel she had never met, but who had been moved by her willingness to sacrifice her career for her principles. A young private stepped forward awkwardly. "Lieutenant, we just wanted to say, what you did mattered. Not just for the people involved in that operation, but for all of us trying to serve with honor." Maya was deeply moved but maintained her characteristic composure. "I only did what I believed was necessary. Each of you would have done the same if placed in that position." Elena Cortez shook her head. "With respect, ma'am, that's not true. Most of us stayed silent even knowing what had happened. It took seeing your courage to find our own." The impact of Maya's stand extended far beyond Fort Blackstone. The investigation into Operation Sable Shield revealed systematic problems in how after-action reports were reviewed and verified. The military implemented new protocols ensuring that dissenting analyses received proper consideration rather than being administratively dismissed. Captain Reeves ultimately resigned his commission rather than face a formal court-martial. The official reason cited was personal matters requiring full attention, but everyone understood the reality. Several officers who had helped suppress the initial reports received formal reprimands, their career advancement effectively halted. More importantly, Maya's actions sparked essential conversations throughout the military about moral courage in modern warfare contexts. Training programs began incorporating ethical, decision-making scenarios that challenged participants to consider complex situations where regulations and moral imperatives might conflict. 6 months after the ceremony, Maya received a letter from one of the soldiers who had been hospitalized after Operation Sable Shield. "For months, I believed I was alone in questioning what happened that day," he wrote. "Hearing that someone had finally stood up against the official narrative was the first step in my healing process. Your courage gave me permission to trust my own memories and begin to process them honestly." Maya kept that letter with her, a reminder that moral courage could have impacts far beyond the immediate circumstances. She never regretted her decision, even knowing the career limitations it would likely impose. Some principles were worth defending, even at personal cost. At the 1-year anniversary of the ceremony, a military ethics journal published an anonymous case study about an officer who had refused to participate in honoring a commander who had violated core principles. The case study became required reading for officer candidates, sparking intense discussions about the balance between discipline and integrity. Maya never sought recognition for her stand. When asked about it, she would simply say, "I made the only choice I could live with." But throughout the military, her story spread, often told by those who had witnessed it firsthand. It became a touchstone for discussions about moral courage in institutional settings, about the responsibility of individuals within systems that sometimes protect the wrong people. The institutional barriers Maya faced weren't immediately obvious. To outsiders, the military prided itself on clear chains of command, structured protocols, and established systems for addressing concerns. In theory, any service member with legitimate evidence of misconduct could report it through proper channels and expect appropriate investigation. The reality, as Maya discovered, was far more complicated. Maya's journey to that pivotal moment of refusing to salute began months earlier when she was assigned to the Operations Assessment Division. Her role involved analyzing field reports to identify tactical patterns, assess operational effectiveness, and recommend procedural improvements. The position required meticulous attention to detail, advanced analytical skills, and absolute commitment to accuracy regardless of political sensitivities. When Operation Sable Shield's reports first crossed her desk, Maya noticed subtle inconsistencies immediately. The timeline contained unexplained gaps. Casualty reports didn't match medical evacuation records. Communications logs showed mysterious outages precisely when critical decisions were made. Most concerning, civilian impact assessments contained statistical anomalies suggesting deliberate underreporting. Following protocol exactly, Maya flagged these discrepancies in her initial assessment, carefully documenting each inconsistency with supporting evidence. She submitted her report through the proper chain of command, expecting standard review procedures to be initiated. When her report returned, marked "Reviewed, no action required," without any explanation or engagement with her specific concerns, she was surprised but not yet suspicious. The system sometimes moves slowly, her colleague Captain Marcus Rodriguez advised when she expressed frustration. Submit a follow-up with more explicit documentation. Sometimes these things need persistence. Maya took his advice, expanding her analysis to include comparative data from similar operations, statistical analyses of casualty reporting patterns, and specific citations of procedural violations. Her second report was even more comprehensive, leaving no room for misinterpretation. When this report vanished entirely from the system, with no acknowledgement it ever existed, she realized something more concerning than bureaucratic inefficiency was happening. "Lieutenant, a word please." Her immediate superior, Major Daniels, called her into his office after her third attempt to raise concerns. His expression was carefully neutral, but tension showed in his tightly clasped hands on the desk. "I understand you have concerns about Operation Sable Shield's reporting." "Yes, sir. The discrepancies suggest serious protocol violations and possible deliberate falsification of." He raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Lieutenant Winters, I need to be clear about something. Operation Sable Shield has been reviewed at the highest levels. Its outcomes have been deemed satisfactory, and Captain Reeves has received commendations for his leadership. Continuing to question these determinations is not productive for your career." The warning was unmistakable, delivered with professional courtesy but absolute clarity. Maya left his office understanding that institutional barriers had been erected specifically to protect the official narrative around Operation Sable Shield. The question became whether she would accept those barriers or find ways to navigate around them. Maya was not naive about institutional politics. She understood that military operations sometimes required difficult decisions, that commanders in the field faced complexities that might not be fully captured in reports. What troubled her wasn't that mistakes had occurred. Warfare inevitably involved error and uncertainty. What troubled her was the systematic effort to conceal those mistakes and prevent accountability. She began working through alternative channels, carefully documenting each step to ensure she couldn't be accused of violating protocol. She requested medical records for all personnel involved in the operation, citing a statistical analysis project on combat injuries. The patterns she found were disturbing. Several soldiers had received psychiatric interventions immediately following the operation, with symptoms consistent with moral injury rather than standard combat trauma. When she attempted to interview these soldiers, she encountered another institutional barrier. "Those personnel are unavailable for interview," the medical officer informed her stiffly. "Their conditions require isolation from potential stressors related to their service experiences." Maya submitted a formal request for clarification of review procedures, asking specifically which officers had reviewed her initial reports and what criteria had been used to dismiss her concerns. The response was a formal reprimand for questioning established review protocols and demonstrating inappropriate persistence regarding closed matters. Each barrier she encountered only strengthened her determination. Maya began carefully building a network of allies who shared her concerns about accountability. A clerk in records management quietly confirmed that her second report had been deliberately removed from the system. A medical technician provided anonymized treatment notes showing that injured soldiers had reported witnessing civilian casualties significantly higher than official counts. Most significantly, she made contact with Staff Sergeant Ilana Cortez, who had served on Captain Reeves' communications team during the operation. Their first meeting occurred in an off-base coffee shop, both women dressed in civilian clothes, careful to maintain operational security while discussing classified matters. "I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions," Elena said, quietly stirring her coffee without drinking it, eyes constantly scanning for anyone paying too much attention to their conversation. "What happened in that village? It wasn't what the reports say, not even close. I need details, Sergeant. Specific contradictions I can document." Elena's hand trembled slightly as she reached into her bag, removing a small notebook. "I kept my own records, against regulations, but I knew something was wrong when they made us rewrite our initial reports." She slid the notebook across the table. Captain Reeves received direct orders to avoid the village. Intelligence had flagged it as a possible location for a high-value target, but specifically stated confirmation was required before any engagement because of the civilian population density. "But he went in anyway," Maya said, already knowing the answer from her analysis. Elena nodded grimly. He saw an opportunity for a career-making capture. Overrode concerns from his team, claimed communications were down so he couldn't receive updated orders, and took us straight into a situation that violated every rule of engagement we operate under. The notebook contained dates, times, specific communications, and most damning, a record of Captain Reeves' direct orders to modify after-action reports to conceal both the deliberate nature of his decision and its consequences. Maya carefully photographed each page, knowing this evidence would be essential if she ever managed to break through the barriers protecting the captain. As Maya gathered evidence, she also studied military regulations governing whistleblower protections and the ethical obligations of officers who become aware of potential war crimes or violations of military law. She discovered that while protections existed in theory, practical application often failed when high-profile operations or decorated officers were involved. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were increasingly tense. Maya submitted formal requests to be excused from attendance, citing scheduling conflicts and pending analysis projects. Each request was denied with increasing firmness. Her commanding officer made it explicitly clear that her presence was required and that full participation in all ceremonial aspects was expected. "This is a direct order, Lieutenant," Major Daniel stated during their final conversation before the ceremony. "You will attend, you will follow all protocols, and you will demonstrate appropriate military courtesy to all decorated officers, including Captain Reeves." Maya stood at perfect attention. "Sir, I understand your order. Do you also understand the consequences of failing to follow that order?" "Perfectly, sir." What her commanding officer couldn't understand was that Maya had already calculated those consequences and found them acceptable. Her West Point education had emphasized that military service was fundamentally about honor, integrity, and moral courage, sometimes at personal cost. The Academy's motto, duty, honor, country, placed honor squarely between obligation and patriotism, suggesting that true duty could not exist without personal integrity. The night before the ceremony, Maya sat alone in her quarters, methodically reviewing her options one final time. She could comply with orders rendering the expected salute despite knowing it represented honoring conduct that had cost lives unnecessarily. She could call in sick, facing disciplinary action for obvious evasion of duty, or she could attend and make a deliberate statement by withholding the customary salute, knowing this would likely end her military career. Her decision crystallized around a simple question: what action can I live with for the rest of my life? The answer became clear. Maya slept soundly that night, at peace with the knowledge that her career would likely end the following day. The morning of the ceremony brought perfect weather, as though nature itself approved of the military pageantry plan. Maya dressed with exceptional care, ensuring every aspect of her uniform was immaculate. If this was to be her final day as an officer, she would embody the physical standards of military service impeccably, even while challenging its moral compromises. During the ceremony preparation, she observed Captain Reeves from a distance, noting how comfortably he accepted the admiration of senior officers, how effortlessly he embodied the role of the decorated hero. Nothing in his demeanor suggested awareness of, much less remorse for, the actual consequences of his decisions in the field. When the critical moment arrived, Maya's refusal to salute was not an impulsive act of rebellion, but a carefully considered moral statement. She understood precisely what her actions would communicate, and had accepted the personal consequences in advance. What she hadn't anticipated was how her solitary stand would resonate with others who had been carrying their own silent concerns. After being dismissed to quarters following her meeting with Colonel Harrington, Maya expected isolation. Instead, she found herself at the center of a growing movement of conscience within the base. It began with Elena Cortez's visit, but soon expanded as others found courage in Maya's example. Specialist Jackson from Intelligence Analysis slipped a note under her door. "Your stand made me question my own silence. I have documentation about the intelligence assessments Captain Reeves ignored. I'm coming forward tomorrow." Lieutenant Cooper from Medical Services called using a secure line. 3 of the soldiers from that operation were under my care afterward. Their trauma stemmed from witnessing civilian casualties they were ordered not to report. I've submitted my clinical notes to the investigation. Even Major Daniels, who had explicitly warned Maya against pursuing her concerns, requested a brief meeting. "I gave you direct orders to comply with ceremony protocols," he acknowledged, his expression troubled. "But I've been reviewing the evidence you've been collecting. If half of it is accurate." He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. The institutional barriers were beginning to crack. The investigation expanded rapidly as multiple sources provided corroborating evidence. What had begun as Maya's isolated stand transformed into a comprehensive examination of not just Captain Reeves' actions, but the systems that had protected him afterward. Colonel Harrington called Maya to her office 3 days after the ceremony. "The situation has evolved considerably, Lieutenant," she stated, her tone carefully professional. "The Inspector General's office has taken direct control of the investigation, given the seriousness of the emerging evidence. And my status, Colonel, remains complex. Your actions violated military protocol in a highly visible manner. That requires appropriate response." The colonel paused, studying Maya carefully. "However, context matters. The investigation now includes examination of why your attempts to address these concerns through proper channels were suppressed. Those responsible for that suppression may face more serious consequences than you do." The colonel's next statement surprised Maya. "The Secretary of the Army has taken personal interest in this case. Not just Captain Reeves' actions in the field, but the institutional response to your attempts to raise concerns. There are indications that this may lead to systemic reforms in how we handle internal reporting of potential misconduct." This revelation transformed Maya's understanding of her actions. What she had intended as an individual moral stand, likely ending her career, might instead catalyze institutional change that would protect future whistleblowers and strengthen accountability mechanisms throughout the military. As the investigation progressed, Maya received permission to move about the base, though she remained restricted from leaving Fort Blackstone. The reactions she encountered revealed the complex impact of her stand. Some officers deliberately avoided her, viewing her actions as a betrayal of military discipline and cohesion. Others sought her out, sometimes just to say quietly, "I understand why you did it." Most striking were the reactions from enlisted personnel, who often expressed their respect through subtle gestures, a nod in the mess hall, a slightly deeper than necessary salute when passing her, quiet words of encouragement when superior officers weren't present. "What you did took real courage, ma'am," a young corporal told her quietly while they waited in line for morning coffee. "Standing alone like that when everyone else just followed along. I didn't do it to stand out," Maya responded honestly. "That's why it mattered, ma'am. You did it because it was right, not because anyone was watching." This conversation revealed something Maya hadn't fully appreciated before. The impact of moral courage extended far beyond the immediate circumstances that prompted it. Her stand had created space for others to examine their own choices, to question when obedience served proper military function and when it enabled dysfunction or wrongdoing. 2 weeks into the investigation, Maya was asked to provide testimony to the full investigative panel, which now included representatives from the Inspector General's office, the Judge Advocate General's corps, and senior officers from outside. Fort Blackstone's command structure. The composition suggested the seriousness with which her allegations were now being treated. Maya testified for over 4 hours, presenting her evidence methodically, responding to questions with precise detail and unwavering composure. She never characterized Captain Reeves' motives, focusing exclusively on documented actions and their consequences. When asked about her decision to refuse the salute, she explained it as the only remaining option after exhausting all available reporting channels. "Lieutenant Winters," one panel member asked toward the end of her testimony, "given the significant career risk your actions entailed, was there a particular moment when you decided this matter was worth that potential sacrifice?" Maya considered the question carefully. "Yes, sir. When I reviewed the medical records and realized that soldiers under Captain Reeves' command were suffering psychological trauma, specifically related to witnessing events they had been ordered not to report. At that point, the issue transcended ordinary operational disagreements and became a matter of fundamental military integrity." As she left the hearing room, Maya found several junior officers waiting in the hallway. They stood at attention. As she passed, a silent demonstration of respect that moved her deeply. One young lieutenant whispered, "Thank you for showing us what duty, honor, country really means." The investigation's findings were released 1 month after the ceremony. The report confirmed most of Maya's allegations, documenting that Captain Reeves had indeed disobeyed direct orders, endangered his team unnecessarily, caused avoidable civilian casualties, and subsequently falsified reports to conceal these actions. Most damning, the investigation revealed a pattern of similar behavior in previous operations, each time protected by senior officers who valued his tactical successes over ethical concerns. The report also addressed the institutional failures that had suppressed Maya's attempts to report these issues. 3 officers were identified as having deliberately obstructed proper review procedures, motivated variously by personal loyalty to Captain Reeves, concern about potential political ramifications of the revelations, and career self-protection. Captain Reeves was immediately relieved of command pending potential court-martial proceedings. Rather than face this process, he submitted his resignation, effectively ending his military career. The officers who had suppressed Maya's reports received formal reprimands that would prevent future promotions, essentially ending their advancement while avoiding the public spectacle of demotions or discharges. The most significant outcome, however, was announced by the Secretary of the Army in a press conference that carefully avoided mentioning specifics of the case while addressing its implications. Recent events have highlighted the need for robust, independent review channels for operational concerns, particularly those involving potential ethical violations, the Secretary stated. "We are implementing immediate reforms to ensure that personnel who raise legitimate concerns about misconduct are protected from retaliation and that their reports receive appropriate, independent review. These reforms included creation of a Special Inspector General position focused exclusively on field operation ethical concerns, implementation of anonymized reporting channels that bypass direct chains of command, and incorporation of ethical decision-making scenarios into promotion qualification assessments for all officers. The next morning, Margaret arrived at her office earlier than usual. She had emailed the department chair requesting a 2-week personal leave, citing a family emergency. The fabrication felt uncomfortable. In 15 years at Westridge, she had rarely taken time off and never lied about her reasons. But the situation warranted extraordinary measures. She was arranging substitute coverage for her classes when her office phone rang. The caller ID showed Westridge President's office. Dr. Chun speaking. Margaret, it's President Harlow. Do you have a moment to come to my office? 20 minutes later, Margaret sat across from Elaine Harlow, the university president. She had worked with for nearly a decade. The president's office was elegant but understated, reflecting its occupants' practical approach to leadership. Margaret, I received a rather unusual call this morning, President Harlow began. A colonel, Barrett from Fort Reynolds, informed me that your expertise is needed for a time-sensitive government consultation. He was deliberately vague about details, but emphasized national security implications. Margaret kept her expression neutral. I was going to discuss this with you after arranging coverage for my classes. This is rather unexpected, President. Harlow noted. In all your years here, you've never mentioned consulting for the military. It relates to work I did before coming to Westridge, Margaret explained carefully. Specialized analysis that's suddenly relevant again. President. Harlow studied her with newfound curiosity. The colonel spoke of you with remarkable deference. He mentioned your clearance level exceeds his own, which I found particularly interesting given that I've known you as our mathematics department chair for 10 years. Margaret remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. He also assured me that your temporary absence would be considered a matter of national service, with commensurate compensation to both you and the college. President Harlow leaned forward. Margaret, clearly there's more to your background than your CV suggests. My work at Westridge has never been compromised by my previous experience, Margaret said carefully. I never suggested it was. The president's expression softened. Whatever you did before, whatever you're being asked to do now, it must be important for a base commander to call me directly. It is. President Harlow nodded. Take the time you need. Your classes will be covered. She hesitated. Come back to us, Margaret. You're too valuable to lose permanently. The genuine concern in her voice caught Margaret by surprise. In her determination to keep her past separate from her present, she had sometimes overlooked the real connections she had formed at Westridge. Thank you, Elaine. I have every intention of returning. This is my life now. As Margaret left the president's office, she realized that her carefully compartmentalized worlds were beginning to bleed together. For 15 years she had been Dr. Chun, mathematician, with Echo locked securely away in classified files and the disciplined corners of her mind. Now those boundaries were eroding, forcing her to navigate between identities she had intended to keep forever separate. At Fort Reynolds that afternoon, Margaret arrived at the specialized training facility designated for her work with the tactical team. She had exchanged her usual professional attire for more practical clothing, dark pants, a simple button-down shirt, and boots that had spent years in her closet, but still fit perfectly. The familiar weight of her sidearm in its shoulder holster was both foreign and natural, like returning to a childhood language long unused, but never truly forgotten. The facility contained an indoor range, simulation rooms, and planning areas with advanced technology that made Margaret inwardly marvel at how equipment had evolved since her active days. Commander Reeves met her at the entrance. The team is assembled and ready for your assessment, Dr. Chun. I'm not here to assess them, Commander. I'm here to prepare them for a specific adversary, of course. But they need to understand that your insights come from direct operational experience. A demonstration might help establish the appropriate foundation. Margaret recognized the diplomatic phrasing. The tactical team, elite operators in their own right, needed to see evidence of her capabilities before they would fully accept her guidance. Fair enough. The 4 operators were waiting in the main training room. Margaret recognized them from the previous day's briefing, but now noted details she had previously overlooked. 2 men, 2 women, all with the coiled readiness of people accustomed to high-stakes environments. Their expressions ranged from professional courtesy to barely concealed skepticism. Dr. Chen will be leading this specialized preparation for the Belgrade operation, Commander Reeves announced. She has unique insights into Kingfisher's methodologies and operational patterns. With respect, ma'am, one of the male operators began. Our team has extensive experience with counter-sniper operations. We've studied the Belgrade parameters thoroughly. Margaret noted his name tag, Hayes. Lieutenant Hayes, have you ever encountered an adversary who approaches precision work as a mathematical equation rather than a physical skill? The question caught him off guard. I'm not sure I follow. Most precision specialists work from a physical foundation, breath control, trigger discipline, positional awareness. They develop an intuitive feel for environmental factors. Kingfisher is different. He calculates variables with mathematical precision. His approach is algorithmic. All snipers calculate variables, the other male operator noted. Martinez, according to his tag. Not like this, Margaret replied. She turned to the tactical planning station and pulled up the Belgrade schematics. May I? Commander Reeves nodded, and Margaret accessed the system with surprising familiarity. Despite the updated interface, she quickly input parameters, creating a simulation of the expected operational environment. Kingfisher will choose his position based on mathematical optimization, not tactical convenience. Traditional counter-sniper operations focus on identifying the most advantageous firing positions. That won't work with him. Her fingers moved rapidly across the interface. He'll solve for multiple variables simultaneously, not just ballistic considerations, but also extraction probability, countermeasures, and time horizons. She highlighted 3 locations on the schematic that hadn't been flagged in the team's initial assessment. These positions are suboptimal from a traditional perspective: limited visibility, challenging angles, restricted egress options. But they represent mathematical solutions to the overall problem Kingfisher is trying to solve. One of the female operators, Wilson, stepped closer to examine the highlighted positions. These would be incredibly difficult shots. Difficulty is subjective, Margaret replied. From a pure mathematics perspective, these positions optimize his complete operational equation. She turned to face the team directly. Kingfisher doesn't think like a conventional operator. He thinks like a mathematician solving for multiple variables. That's why conventional countermeasures have failed against him. Lieutenant Hayes still looked unconvinced. With all due respect, Dr. Chen, theory is valuable, but this operation requires practical field experience. The kind that's current and relevant to today's operational realities. Margaret recognized the underlying message. To this team, she was an academic, a consultant who might have had field experience decades ago, but who now spent her days explaining calculus to undergraduates. Her credibility gap was understandable, but potentially dangerous given what they were facing. Commander Reeves seemed to sense the tension. Perhaps a practical demonstration would be helpful. He gestured toward the adjacent training range. Dr. Chen, would you be willing to run through Simulation Protocol Echo 7 with the team? It might provide useful context. The designation wasn't coincidental. Echo 7 was a specialized counter-sniper scenario designed to test advanced precision skills under complex conditions. Margaret hadn't run such a simulation in 15 years. But she nodded calmly. Of course, Commander. The team moved to the simulation range, which was configured with multiple target systems at varying distances and environmental challenge factors. Margaret noted the skeptical glances exchanged among the operators as she prepared. They expected the academic to embarrass herself. Standard qualification parameters? She asked Commander Reeves. Let's make it interesting, he replied. Full. Environmental variables, moving targets, counterposition indicators. In other words, the most challenging configuration possible. Margaret suppressed a smile. The commander was setting the stage for maximum impact. She selected a standard issue rifle from the equipment rack, rather than one of the specialized precision weapons. Another calculated choice, demonstrating proficiency with basic equipment would make a stronger impression than relying on advanced technology. Whenever you're ready, Dr. Chun, Commander Reeves said, activating the simulation system. Margaret took position at the firing line. The operators watched with professional curiosity but clear skepticism. She took a moment to familiarize herself with the weapon, checking its balance and sighting. Then she grew completely still. The change was subtle but unmistakable to trained observers. Her breathing pattern shifted, her posture adjusted microscopically, and her focus narrowed with laser intensity. The mathematics professor disappeared, replaced by someone else entirely. The simulation began with targets appearing at varying distances under changing environmental conditions. Margaret engaged each one with methodical precision, her shots finding center mass with consistent accuracy despite the challenging parameters. As the simulation progressed, the difficulty increased. Moving targets, partial visual obstruction, simulated environmental interference. Through it all, Margaret maintained the same focused calm, adjusting for variables with mathematical precision. Her shooting wasn't just accurate, it was calculated. Each shot placed exactly where it needed to be with an efficiency of movement that spoke of thousands of hours of specialized training. When the final target fell and the simulation ended, silence filled the range. The operators stared at the performance metrics displayed on the monitoring system, a perfect score under maximum difficulty conditions. Even for elite operators, such performance was exceptional. For someone they had dismissed as an academic consultant, it was revelatory. Lieutenant Hayes broke the silence. That was impressive, ma'am. It's been a while, Margaret admitted, returning the rifle to the rack with the same careful attention she had given it initially. The principles remain the same, even if the technology has evolved. Commander Reeves allowed himself a small smile. Dr. Chun holds the record for this particular simulation protocol. Has for 15 years, despite numerous attempts to surpass. Ed Wilson, who had been studying the performance metrics with particular attention, looked up. You weren't just operational, were you? You were something else entirely. Phantom Scope was a specialized program, Margaret acknowledged, offering the minimum necessary information. We provided precision support under complex conditions. When conventional assets weren't viable. You were a ghost, Martinez said with new respect in his voice. The kind of asset that doesn't officially exist, but somehow always delivers when everything else fails. Margaret neither confirmed nor denied. Let's focus on the task at hand. You're facing an adversary with a unique approach to precision work. Understanding his methodology is critical to countering it effectively. The demonstration had achieved its purpose. The skepticism had vanished, replaced by focused attention, as Margaret began detailing Kingfisher's operational patterns. Using the simulation system, she created scenarios that illustrated his particular approach to precision problems. He calculates multiple variables simultaneously, she explained, demonstrating through the tactical interface. Environmental factors, timing considerations, countermeasure probabilities. He processes these as a unified mathematical problem rather than separate tactical considerations. How do you counter someone who approaches operations that way? Wilson asked. By introducing variables he can't easily calculate, Margaret replied. Uncertainty is his weakness. His mathematical approach requires reliable inputs. If you can disrupt his calculations, Introduce factors he can't readily quantify. His advantage diminishes significantly. For the next several hours, Margaret guided the team through increasingly complex scenarios, demonstrating Kingfisher's likely approaches and potential counter-strategies. The operators proved exceptionally capable, absorbing her insights and applying them with impressive adaptability. As the initial training session concluded, Commander Reeves pulled Margaret aside. "They're responding well to your guidance. Better than I anticipated, frankly." "They're excellent operators," Margaret acknowledged. Quick to adapt, open to new perspectives once the initial skepticism was addressed. "Will they be ready for Belgrade?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "They have the technical skills and tactical awareness. What concerns me is Kingfisher's adaptability. He learns from each encounter, adjusts his calculations accordingly. The Belgrade parameters suggest he's anticipating countermeasures based on historical patterns, which is why your insight is invaluable. You're the variable he can't fully calculate." "Perhaps," Margaret conceded, "but I won't be in Belgrade." Commander Reeves studied her with thoughtful consideration. "No, but your knowledge will be. That may be sufficient to disrupt his equations." As Margaret prepared to leave the facility, Lieutenant Hayes approached her. His earlier skepticism had been replaced by professional respect. "Dr. Chun, the team would like to continue working through scenario variations this evening. Would you be available to observe and provide feedback?" The request represented a significant shift in their perception of her value. Margaret nodded. "Of course, Lieutenant. I'll return after dinner." "Thank you, ma'am." He hesitated. "If I may ask, how did you transition from operational work to teaching mathematics?" The question was asked with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Margaret considered her response carefully. "Mathematics was always my foundation," she finally said. "The operational application was circumstantial, driven by necessity rather than preference. Teaching allows me to share the foundational principles without the life or death consequences. Do you miss it? The operational work." Margaret thought about the peaceful rhythm of her classroom, the satisfaction of watching students grasp complex concepts, the simple pleasure of discussing theoretical problems with no blood on the line. "I miss the clarity," she admitted. "In operational environments, objectives are precise, success metrics unambiguous. Academia is more nuanced, more subjective in many ways." She smiled slightly. "But I don't miss the consequences of failure." Hayes nodded with understanding. "I can see that. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us, ma'am. It's, not what we expected, but exactly what we needed." As Hayes rejoined his team, Margaret found Commander Reeves watching the exchange with interest. "You've made quite an impression," he observed. "When we first discussed bringing you in, Colonel Barrett was concerned the age gap and your civilian status might create friction." "Operational respect transcends those considerations," Margaret replied. "They recognize valid insight regardless of its source." "True, but it usually takes longer to establish that credibility. Your range demonstration accelerated the process considerably." Margaret shrugged. "Actions communicate more effectively than credentials in this environment." As she left the facility, Margaret felt the familiar mental adjustment, the compartmentalization, that had allowed her to function in multiple worlds throughout her career. For years, she had kept Echo locked away, focusing entirely on becoming Dr. Chun. Now she was navigating between identities again, drawing on both aspects of herself to address the current challenge. The following morning, Margaret arrived at the facility to find the team already engaged in scenario planning. They had clearly worked late into the night, developing varied approaches based on her guidance. Their tactical boards displayed mathematical formulas alongside conventional operational notations, a visual representation of how they were integrating her perspective into their planning. "Good morning, Dr. Chun," Wilson greeted her. "We've then applying your probability calculations to the Belgrade parameters. We'd appreciate your assessment of our modifications. For the next several days, Margaret worked intensively with the team, refining their understanding of kingfishers methodology and developing counter-strategies specifically tailored to his mathematical approach. The training evolved beyond conventional tactical preparation into a sophisticated integration of mathematical precision and operational adaptability. On the fourth day, Colonel Barrett joined their session to review progress. The tactical boards now displayed complex calculations and scenario variations that would have been unintelligible to conventional operators, but represented a sophisticated counter-approach to Kingfisher's methods. "Impressive work," the colonel observed after the team's briefing. "You've developed a counter-methodology that accounts for variables I wouldn't have considered relevant. Dr. Chun helped us understand that we're not just countering tactical decisions," Lieutenant Hayes explained. "We're disrupting a mathematical model that requires a fundamentally different approach." Colonel Barrett nodded. "Belgrade deployment is scheduled for 72 hours from now. Final preparations?" "We're running integration exercises this afternoon," Martinez replied. "Synthesizing the mathematical countermeasures with physical deployment strategies." "Dr. Chun, your assessment of team readiness?" Margaret considered the question with the same careful analysis she brought to all operational evaluations. "They've internalized the core principles necessary to counter Kingfisher's approach. The remaining challenge is operational adaptation in real-time conditions. Kingfisher adjusts his calculations continuously based on emerging variables. The team needs to anticipate those adjustments rather than merely reacting to them. And your recommendation for addressing that challenge?" "Real-time mathematical support during the operation," Margaret said without hesitation. "Someone who can model his likely adjustments as conditions evolve and communicate counter-adjustments to the field team." "Who did you have in mind for that role?" Colonel Barrett asked. Though his expression suggested he already knew the answer, Margaret met his gaze directly. "I would need to be in the Operational Support Center, Colonel. Not deployed in the field, but connected to the team communication system with access to real-time environmental data." The tactical team exchanged glances. This hadn't been part of the original operational plan, but the logic was undeniable. Kingfisher's greatest advantage was his ability to solve complex mathematical problems in real time. Having someone who could anticipate those calculations would provide a critical edge. "That would require reactivating your operational status," Colonel Barrett noted. "Temporary clearance elevation, formal integration with the command structure." "For this operation only," Margaret specified. "I'm not returning to active service permanently." "Understood." The colonel turned to Commander Reeves. "Make the necessary arrangements. Dr. Chun will deploy with the support team to the Belgrade Command Center." As the meeting concluded, Wilson approached Margaret. "Thank you for taking this step, Dr. Chun. Having your real-time analysis will significantly improve our operational parameters." "I'm just providing mathematical support," Margaret clarified. "You and your team are doing the actual work." "Mathematics that saves lives is more than just support," Wilson replied. "We understand why you left this world for academia. That you're willing to step back in, even temporarily, it means a lot." Margaret watched as the team returned to their preparations with renewed focus. Her decision to participate directly in the operation hadn't been made lightly. For 15 years, she had maintained the firm boundary between her past and present lives. Crossing that line, even in a limited support capacity, represented a significant deviation from the path she had chosen. Yet as she observed the team, integrating her insights into their planning, Margaret recognized that some knowledge created obligations that transcended personal preference. Her understanding of Kingfisher's methodology wasn't just academic information, it was specialized insight that could prevent loss of life. Withholding it out of commitment to her new identity would have violated the core principles that had guided her throughout both her careers. That evening, as she prepared for deployment to Belgrade, Margaret contacted President Harlow to extend her leave of absence by 1 week. The conversation was brief but meaningful. "I had a feeling this might happen," President Harlow said. Colonel Barrett mentioned the possibility when he first called. "I apologize for the disruption to the department's schedule," Margaret replied. "Some disruptions are necessary, Margaret." The president's voice carried understanding beyond her words. "Whatever you're doing, whoever you really are beyond Dr. Chun, it must be important." "It is," Margaret acknowledged. "But Dr. Chun isn't a cover or a disguise, Elaine. She's who I chose to become when I left my previous life behind. Who I intend to remain when this situation is resolved." "I believe you," President Harlow said simply, "and will be here when you return. Your students miss you already, you know." Emily asked specifically when you'd be back for those office hours you promised her. The reminder of her waiting students, of the life she had built at Westridge, reinforced Margaret's determination. This temporary return to her former world was exactly that, temporary. A necessary deviation to address a specific threat, after which she would return to the life she had chosen, to the person she had decided to become. As she packed the few items she would need for the Belgrade deployment, Margaret reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. 15 years ago, she had walked away from Echo, from the world of classified operations and life-or-death calculations. She had built a new identity with careful intention, becoming Dr. Margaret Chen through deliberate choice rather than operational necessity. Now circumstances had forced a temporary convergence of those separate lives. For the Belgrade operation, she would need to be both the mathematician and the operative, Dr. Chun and Echo, drawing on the full spectrum of her knowledge and experience to counter an adversary who approached precision work with the same mathematical foundation that had always guided her own actions. The irony wasn't lost on her. After 15 years of keeping her world separate, it would be their integration that might prove most valuable now. Perhaps there was a lesson in that our strength sometimes comes not from compartmentalizing our different selves, but from allowing them to inform and enhance each other. Tomorrow she would deploy to Belgrade as part of the operational support team. For a brief time, Echo would re-emerge to counter a threat only she truly understood. But when it was done, Margaret Chun would return to her classroom, to her students, to the life she had chosen, perhaps not unchanged, but still fundamentally the person she had decided to become. Belgrade sprawled beneath a gray sky as the military transport descended toward the airfield. Margaret watched through the small window as the Serbian capital came into view, a city she had last seen almost 2 decades earlier under very different circumstances. Then, she had been Echo, operating alone to neutralize a threat targeting diplomatic personnel. Now she returned as Dr. Margaret Chun, mathematics professor temporarily recommissioned to provide specialized support. The Operational Command Center had been established in a nondescript office building with diplomatic cover. As Margaret was escorted through layers of security, she noted how seamlessly modern technology integrated with traditional protocols. Biometric scanners supplemented human verification. Digital encryption enhanced physical security measures. The operational world had evolved during her absence, but its fundamental principles remained unchanged. Colonel Barrett greeted her in the secure briefing room. "Dr. Chun, welcome to Belgrade. I trust your journey was uneventful." "Entirely routine," Margaret confirmed. "Status update?" "The team arrived 12 hours ago and has established preliminary positions. Target confirmation expected within the next 24 hours. He gestured toward a specialized workstation that had been configured according to specifications she had provided. "Your support platform is ready. Lieutenant Wilson will be your primary field contact." Margaret examined the system. A Sophisticated integration of tactical feeds, environmental monitoring, and analytical tools specifically designed for mathematical modeling of precision operations. The interface was more advanced than anything available during her active service, but the underlying principles were familiar. When did Kingfisher last surface? She asked, activating the system with her credentials. Facial recognition tagged. Him at a cafe near the Parliament building yesterday afternoon. Intelligence suggests he's in final preparation phase for an operation targeting the security summit. Margaret nodded, accessing the intelligence feeds. Has he established a pattern yet? Reconnaissance routes, timing intervals? Limited. Data. He's being exceptionally cautious. Colonel Barrett displayed surveillance footage showing a gray-haired man moving through a crowded market. Nothing about him would draw attention. His clothing, posture, and demeanor designed for maximum anonymity. But Margaret recognized the mathematical precision in his movement pattern, the calculated efficiency in his environmental scanning. That's him, she confirmed. He's already mapping variables, timing patterns, security rotations, civilian density fluctuations. His operational calculations have begun. How can you be certain from such limited observation? His pattern indicates systematic data collection rather than casual movement. He's establishing baseline metrics for his operational equations. Margaret studied the footage with focused intensity. He's more thorough than before. His Basra operation showed 18 distinct calculation points. This suggests he's expanded to 24 or more. For the next several hours, Margaret immersed herself in the operational data, constructing mathematical models of Kingfisher's likely calculations. The command center staff observed with fascination as she transformed surveillance footage and environmental data into complex equations that predicted potential positioning and timing variables. When Lieutenant Wilson established communication from the field, Margaret was ready. Echo Base to Talon 1. Preliminary modeling complete. Uploading potential position calculations now. Receiving upload, Echo Base. Wilson's voice replied through the secure channel. These are different from our initial assessments. Kingfisher doesn't use conventional tactical positioning, Margaret explained. He optimizes mathematical variables rather than tactical advantage. Note calculation set 3, those positions. Sacrifice optimal firing angles for superior calculation stability across environmental variables. Understood. Repositioning surveillance assets accordingly. As the tactical team adjusted their deployment based on Margaret's insights, Colonel Barrett observed her work with newfound appreciation. I've seen many analysts model adversary behavior, Dr. Chen, but never with this level of precision. It's not about predicting what he'll do, Margaret replied, still focused on her calculations. It's about understanding how he thinks. Kingfisher approaches operations as mathematical problems to be solved. His variables include not just physical factors, but probability calculations across multiple scenarios. And you understand this because you think the same way. Margaret paused briefly. We share a foundational approach but apply it differently. His equations optimize for target elimination regardless of collateral impact. Mine always factored in minimizing secondary effects. A critical distinction, the colonel noted. The most important one, Margaret agreed, returning to her analysis. Throughout the night, she refined her models as new intelligence arrived. Communicating regularly with the field team as they established counter positions based on her calculations. The rhythm was familiar, the focused intensity, the mathematical precision, the critical evaluation of emerging variables. For all the years that had passed, this part of her had remained intact, like a language not spoken, but never forgotten. At dawn, activity in the command center intensified. Intelligence confirmed that the security summit would proceed as scheduled, with high-value participants arriving throughout the day. If Kingfisher maintained his historical pattern, he would. execute his operation during the arrival phase when security was most strained by multiple simultaneous movements. Echo base to all Talon units, Margaret transmitted. Sunrise brings new environmental variables. Uploading adjusted calculations. Note particularly the changed wind patterns affecting calculation sets 2 and 4. Copy that, Echo base. Lieutenant Hayes responded. Adjusting positions. Visibility improving with morning light. Margaret studied the tactical displays showing team positions relative to her calculated threat points. They had established excellent coverage based on her models, positioning countermeasures precisely where Kingfisher would most likely operate. But something felt incomplete in her analysis, a variable she hadn't fully accounted for. "Colonel," she said, motioning Barrett to her workstation, "I need to review Kingfisher's recent operational history again. Something isn't aligning with his established pattern." The colonel provided access to the complete intelligence file. Margaret studied the details of Kingfisher's 3 recent operations, comparing methodologies and approach patterns. Halfway through the 3rd file, she identified the anomaly. "He's evolved his methodology," she said, recalculating rapidly. "His recent operations show a secondary calculation set, a contingency approach that activates if primary calculations are disrupted." Meaning, he anticipates countermeasures now. If his primary approach is compromised, he shifts to an entirely different mathematical model. Margaret's fingers moved swiftly across the interface. "We need to account for this in our positioning." She transmitted updated calculations to the field team, explaining the revised approach. Kingfisher now operates with dual mathematical models. If he detects counterpositioning against his primary calculation set, he'll shift to secondary positions that optimize different variables. How do we counter both simultaneously? Martinez asked through the CUM system. "We don't have sufficient personnel to cover all possibilities." "We don't need to," Margaret replied. "We need to disrupt his ability to shift between models. The transition point is his vulnerability, the moment when he must recalculate all variables." For the next hour, Margaret worked with the field team to establish a strategy that would force Kingfisher into that vulnerable transition. Rather than trying to counter both calculation models, they would deliberately reveal countermeasures against his primary approach, forcing him to shift to his secondary model, where specialized countermeasures would already be waiting. As diplomatic convoys began arriving at the summit venue, tension in the command center escalated. Surveillance feeds showed security personnel establishing perimeters, sniffer dogs checking vehicles, plainclothes officers mingling with gathered crowds. Somewhere within this complex environment, Kingfisher was finalizing his calculations, preparing to execute with the mathematical precision that had made him so lethal for so long. "Target identified," Wilson's voice suddenly reported. "Southeast quadrant, moving on foot toward calculation point 3 alpha. Facial confirmation positive." Margaret immediately focused on that sector's surveillance feed. There he was, the same man she had faced in Basra 15 years earlier. Older now, as was she, but moving with the same controlled precision, his eyes constantly gathering data for his mental calculations. "He's running final variable confirmation," Margaret analyzed, checking actual conditions against his calculated model. She studied his movement pattern intently. He's using the primary calculation set. Position 3 alpha aligns with the mathematical optimum for current conditions. "Permission to intercept?" Hayes requested. "Negative," Colonel Barrett responded after glancing at Margaret. "Maintain surveillance. Let him commit to his approach before revealing counter-positioning." Margaret watched as Kingfisher continued his methodical preparation, invisible to anyone who didn't understand what to look for. To casual observers, he was just another man moving through a crowded area. To Margaret, every movement revealed his operational calculations. Every pause indicated a variable confirmation. "He's "Proceeding to final position," she reported as he entered a building overlooking the arrival route. 3 Alpha confirmed as primary target position. "Exactly as calculated. Talon units in position," Hayes confirmed. "Ready to execute on command." Now came the delicate part of their strategy. Timing was critical, revealing their counter position. Too early would give Kingfisher time to fully implement his secondary model. Too late, and he might complete his operation before transitioning. Margaret monitored his progress through the building's security cameras. He moved with practiced efficiency, nothing in his demeanor triggering suspicion from security personnel or civilian occupants. On the 6th floor, he entered a utility room with line of sight to the arrival area below. "He's in final position," Margaret reported. "Beginning equipment assembly." The next 10 minutes unfolded with tense precision. Surveillance showed Kingfisher setting up his operation, not just a rifle, but a sophisticated integrated system that would calculate environmental variables in real time, supporting his mathematical approach with technological assistance. "High-value target convoy approaching," Command Center Tactical reported. 3 minutes to arrival point. Margaret made the call. "Execute counter-position reveal. Pattern Alpha." Hayes acknowledged, and one of their surveillance teams deliberately created visibility, revealing their counter-position to Kingfisher. Through the surveillance feed, Margaret saw his immediate reaction, the split-second pause, the rapid recalculation beginning in his eyes. "He's recognized the counter-position," she reported. "Transitioning to secondary calculation model now." "Talon 2 and 3, shift to contingency positions," Colonel Barrett ordered. "Prepare for intercept at secondary calculation points." Margaret watched as Kingfisher efficiently dismantled his setup. His movements showed no panic, only the smooth transition to an alternative approach, exactly as she had predicted. He exited the utility room, moving toward the emergency stairwell that would lead him to his secondary position. "He's moving." "To calculation point 5 Charlie," Margaret confirmed. Exactly as modeled, the trap was set. Based on Margaret's calculations, teams were already in position at the limited number of locations that would satisfy Kingfisher's secondary mathematical model. As he descended the stairwell, Martinez's team prepared to intercept. "Target approaching your position, Talon 3, Margaret transmitted. 10 seconds. What happened next demonstrated why Kingfisher had remained elusive for so long. Somehow, perhaps through some subtle indicator Margaret hadn't accounted for, he sensed the trap. Instead of continuing down the stairwell, he exited at the 4th floor, immediately adapting his approach. "He's deviating from the calculated model," Margaret reported, rapidly adjusting her equations. "Implementing tertiary calculations we didn't anticipate. Where's he heading?" Colonel Barrett demanded. Margaret's mind raced through the mathematical possibilities. If his primary and secondary models were compromised, what variables would he optimize in a tertiary approach? What mathematical solution would he calculate under these conditions? North Tower, she suddenly realized. He's shifting to a suboptimal firing position with superior escape parameters. Calculating now, 4th floor, northwest corner office. "There's no team in that position," Hayes reported. "Redirect Talon 1 and 4 to intercept," Colonel Barrett ordered. "All other units maintain position in case this is a feint." Margaret focused intensely on her mathematical model. He's calculating a reduced probability shot with enhanced survivability variables. The equation still works, but requires perfect timing to compensate for inferior positioning. On the surveillance feed, they caught glimpses of Kingfisher moving through the 4th floor toward the northwest section. He moved differently now, his previous methodical pace replaced by more efficient movement. He was adapting his entire approach in real time, recalculating all variables simultaneously. "High-value target arrival in 60 seconds, Command reported. "He'll need 20 seconds to set up from the new position," Margaret calculated. Intercept window is extremely narrow. Wilson's voice came through the CUM system. We're approaching the northwest section now. No visual on target yet. The next moments unfolded with agonizing tension. The high-value convoy approached the arrival point. Kingfisher reached the northwest office and began rapidly establishing his position. The tactical team moved to intercept, guided by Margaret's calculations. He's in position, Margaret reported, watching through security cameras as Kingfisher assembled his equipment with remarkable speed. Target acquisition imminent. Talon 1 status? Colonel Barrett demanded. 30 seconds from intercept position, Wilson reported. That's not fast enough, Margaret realized. Kingfisher was already in final preparation, his timing perfectly calculated despite the disruption to his primary and secondary models. His mathematical approach had allowed him to adapt with precision that few operators could match. In that moment, Margaret made a decision that bridged her two worlds completely. Drawing on both her operational experience and her mathematical expertise, she opened a direct communication channel to Kingfisher's position. "Victor Kask," she said, using his real name. "Your calculation model has a critical flaw." Through the surveillance feed, she saw him freeze momentarily, surprised by the sudden voice from the office's communication system. "The wind variable shifted 7 degrees east in the last minute," Margaret continued. "Your current calculation will result in a miss by approximately 3 centimeters, enough to fail your operation parameters." It was a calculated risk, using mathematics to disrupt his concentration at the critical moment. Few people could have crafted such a precise distraction, one that would penetrate the intense focus of someone like Kingfisher. But Margaret understood exactly how his mind worked, how thoroughly he trusted his calculations. The momentary distraction was sufficient. As Kingfisher instinctively checked his environmental readings to verify her claim, Wilson's team breached the office. The intercept was precise and controlled. No shots fired, no collateral damage. Just the efficient neutralization of a threat by operators who understood exactly what they were facing. "Target secured," Wilson reported moments later. "Talon 1 has package. Proceeding to extraction point." In the command center, a brief cheer erupted before professionalism reasserted itself. Colonel Barrett placed a hand on Margaret's shoulder, a gesture of respect rarely offered in operational environments. "That was unorthodox," he said. "Mathematics is a universal language," Margaret replied simply. "I calculated that he would respond to a perceived flaw in his equations more reliably than to any tactical countermeasure, because that's how you would have responded in his position." Margaret didn't answer directly. The operation was successful. The threat has been neutralized with no casualties. Later, as the tactical team returned to the command center with their secured target, Margaret found herself face to face with Victor Kask for the first time since their encounter in Basra. He was in restraints, but held himself with the same mathematical precision she had observed through surveillance. His eyes met hers with immediate recognition. "Echo," he said quietly. "I thought you were dead." "Similarly disappointed about you," Margaret replied. "How did you know?" He asked. "About the calculation model transition?" "Because I would have built the same redundancy into my operational equations. A mathematically sound approach requires contingency variables." He studied her with professional curiosity rather than animosity. "The wind variable, it hadn't actually shifted, had it?" "No, but your operational parameters demand precision. The possibility of a 3-centimeter error was statistically significant enough to warrant verification." "Elegantly calculated," he acknowledged, using mathematics itself as the countermeasure. "I wouldn't have expected that approach from a conventional tactical team." "I'm not conventional," Margaret said simply as security personnel prepared to transfer him to a secure facility. As he was led away, Cass glanced back. "You're teaching now," he said, surprising her with his intelligence awareness. Mathematics. At an American college. An interesting application of your skills. More fulfilling than our previous work, Margaret replied. A small smile touched his lips. Perhaps. Though the equations were always beautiful in their purity. The consequences weren't, Margaret said firmly. After Kask was transferred to custody, the tactical team gathered for debriefing. The atmosphere was charged with the unique energy that follows successful high-risk operations, a mixture of relief, pride, and the beginning of decompression. Dr. Chen, Wilson began, your mathematical approach to counter-operations was unlike anything I've encountered in 15 years of tactical work. You essentially predicted his every move before he made it. Not every move, Margaret corrected. He implemented a tertiary calculation model I hadn't fully anticipated. His adaptability has improved significantly since our last encounter. But you adjusted in real time, Martinez noted. That final communication strategy, using mathematics itself as a disruptor, that was brilliant. Margaret accepted the acknowledgement with a small nod. When facing someone who approaches operations mathematically, the most effective countermeasure is often mathematical rather than tactical. The question, Hayes said, is whether this approach would work against other high-value targets or if it was uniquely effective against Kingfisher because of your shared background. Elements of mathematical prediction can enhance any counter-operation, Margaret replied. But the specific approach we used today was tailored to a particular adversary with a specific operational methodology. Colonel Barrett joined the conversation. Dr. Chun has provided us with a framework for approaching similar operations in the future. Her insights will be incorporated into our advanced training protocols. Will you be involved in developing those protocols? Wilson asked Margaret directly. The question represented a crossroads, an opportunity to reconnect with the operational world she had left behind, to integrate her mathematical expertise with tactical applications in an ongoing capacity. For a moment, Margaret considered the possibility. The work would be intellectually stimulating, the impact potentially significant. But her mind returned to Westridge Community College, to her students waiting for her return, to the peaceful rhythm of academic life she had deliberately chosen. She thought of Emily, waiting for those promised office hours to discuss calculus problems with clear solutions and no life or death consequences. No, she said firmly. My contribution ends with this operation. I'm a mathematics professor now. That's the life I've chosen. With respect, Dr. Chen has said, your skills are extraordinary. The operational community would benefit tremendously from your continued involvement, even in a limited consulting capacity. Lieutenant Hayes, Margaret replied, there are many ways to serve, many ways to apply one's abilities. I've found where my skills can best contribute at this point in my life. Later that evening, as the operation transitioned to its final documentation phase, Margaret prepared for her return journey. Her temporary recommissioning would end upon arrival in the United States, returning her fully to civilian status, to Dr. Margaret Chun, Mathematics Department Chair at Westridge Community College. Commander Reeves found her completing her after-action report. The Colonel tells me you've declined further involvement with operational training. My involvement was always intended to be temporary, Margaret reminded him. A specific response to a specific threat. Of course. He studied her thoughtfully. May I ask, do you ever miss it? The operational clarity, the mathematical purity of field work? Margaret considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss the immediacy, the direct connection between calculation and outcome. Academic work operates on longer timelines, with more diffuse results. But I don't miss the consequences, she said, echoing her earlier words to Kingfisher. In my classroom, a miscalculation results in a teaching opportunity, not a casualty. The stakes are different in ways that matter to me now. Commander. Reeves nodded. I understand. Though I admit, watching you work these past days has been remarkable. The integration of mathematical precision with operational awareness, it's a combination we rarely see. Perhaps that's why the Phantom Scope program was always classified, Margaret suggested. The approach doesn't fit conventional operational paradigms. True, but its effectiveness is undeniable. He extended his hand. It has been an honor working with you, Dr. Chun, or Echo, if you prefer. Margaret is fine, she replied, shaking his hand. Echo belongs to another time. The journey home gave Margaret time to process the events of the past days, the temporary resurgence of capabilities long unused. The integration of her mathematical expertise with operational necessities. The brief return to a world she had deliberately left behind. The experience had been intense, challenging, and oddly fulfilling in ways she hadn't anticipated. Yet as the plane approached American airspace, she felt the familiar transition beginning, the mental recalibration from operational focus to academic perspective. By the time she landed, Dr. Margaret Sheen had fully re-emerged, Echo once again, carefully compartmentalized in the disciplined corners of her mind. President Harlow met her personally when she returned to campus, an unusual gesture that reflected both concern and curiosity. Welcome back, Margaret. You were missed. Thank you, Elaine. It's good to return to normal life. The president studied her with perceptive interest. Was it as you expected? This consultation you were called away for? It was necessary, Margaret replied simply. And now it's complete. Will there be other such consultations in the future? No, this was a unique circumstance requiring specific expertise. It won't be repeated. President Harlow nodded, accepting the boundary Margaret had established. Well, your students will be delighted to have you back. Emily has been practically camping outside your office waiting for those promised office hours. The mention of her waiting student brought a genuine smile to Margaret's face. I'll see her first thing tomorrow. I have some calculus concepts to explain. The following morning, Margaret returned to her classroom with a sense of homecoming that surprised her with its intensity. As students filed in, greeting her with the casual familiarity of the academic environment, she felt the last vestiges of Echo fading, replaced by the identity she had chosen and cultivated for 15 years. When Emily arrived for her office hours, struggling with application problems that had once seemed impossibly complex, Margaret guided her through the mathematical principles with patient clarity. The key, she explained, is understanding that these equations represent relationships between variables. When you see how they connect, the solutions emerge naturally. That makes so much more sense, Emily said with evident relief. The way you explain it, math feels less like memorizing formulas and more like discovering patterns. Exactly, Margaret replied, pleased by the insight. Mathematics is ultimately about recognizing structure within complexity. As Emily gathered her materials to leave, she paused at the door. Dr. Chun, I heard a strange rumor while you were away. Someone said you used to work for the military or something, that you were called away on some classified consultation. Margaret smiled slightly. People often imagine dramatic explanations for ordinary absences. That's what I thought. Emily laughed. I mean, you're a math professor. What would the military want with differential equations, right? Indeed, Margaret agreed. Though mathematics has surprisingly diverse applications. After Emily left, Margaret stood at her office window, looking out at the peaceful campus with its orderly pathways and predictable rhythms. In Belgrade, the tactical team was probably still processing the operation, documenting the mathematical approach that had allowed them to counter one of the most elusive precision specialists in the field. Margaret didn't regret her decision to return fully to academic life. The Belgrade operation had confirmed what she had long believed. that her skills could serve different purposes in different contexts, that the mathematical foundation she had always relied upon could support diverse applications. In her classroom, those same principles now helped students understand the elegance of calculus rather than the precision of tactical operations. The stakes were different, the consequences less immediate, but the fundamental satisfaction of applying mathematical precision to solve problems remained the same. She had been Echo once, would always carry that capability within her. But she had chosen to be Dr. Margaret Chen, had built that identity through deliberate intention rather than operational necessity. The journey to Belgrade had demonstrated that both aspects of herself could coexist, could even complement each other when circumstances required. But as she prepared her lecture notes for tomorrow's class, Margaret knew with absolute certainty which identity she preferred, which life she had rightfully chosen. The quiet woman in pink earmuffs would return to Hawk's Nest this weekend, maintaining her skills with the same methodical precision she applied to all aspects of her life. And if the range instructors now treated her with newfound respect, if they studied her technique with professional curiosity rather than condescension, well, that was simply an unexpected variable in an equation that continued to evolve, just like mathematics itself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.